You and your husband and all the other veterans are my reason for doing it. It's like, you tell me the barrier and I'll either climb it, go around it, dig under it, or blow it up.
Hi everybody and welcome to Different Leaf, a show for new and experienced cannabis consumers. I'm Brit Smith. This week, we're going to be talking about the barriers that military veterans are facing to getting medical marijuana and what it would mean if more vets could have the option to pick pot over pills. As some of you may know, I'm married to a US Marine, and when we first lived together in California and he had just gone out of the military, he wanted to try medical marijuana for several issues that veterans often face, like anxiety, insomnia, and pain. But since he'd just gotten back from his second tour of Afghanistan and he'd just been released into the civilian world, he wasn't quite comfortable getting his own medical marijuana card. Honestly, he was worried that he'd lose his other medical benefits through the Department of Veterans Affairs. So I ended up using my medical card to buy us both what we needed at the time. That was 2014, and the laws around veterans' access to medical marijuana have changed since then in many states. But it is that kind of stigma and fear of losing medical benefits that has driven countless other veterans to avoid even trying to get a medical marijuana card, even in states where it's long been legal. Although a lot has changed, according to one official in Massachusetts, there is still a lot more to do to make sure even more veterans can easily access cannabis as a medical option. Stephen Mandile is a veteran of the Massachusetts Army National Guard who deployed to Iraq in 2004. When we met in 2018, Stephen had been a long-time cannabis activist here in Massachusetts. He'd come off more than a dozen pills that the VA doctors had put him on, and he'd found that medical marijuana was the best fit for him. But as you'll hear from him, he faced losing his own VA benefits as a result of that choice. Stephen is still a marijuana activist, and he's also a selectman in the town of Uxbridge. He's the co-founder of the Cannabis Advancement Series and the 2019 Veterans Health and Medical Cannabis Study, and he's currently working on 2 bills that would expand veterans' access to medical marijuana in Massachusetts. Stephen, the first thing I want to check in on is how things are going with the veteran community locally. So can you tell me what's going on with these bills that you've got right now going through the Massachusetts House and Senate?
Yes, I would love to. So we have 2 bills. The first bill was Bill H-179, and that's in the House, and there is a companion bill in the Senate, and that's Senate Bill S-70. Both of these are titled the same and act to further defining eligibility for medical use of marijuana. These bills do 3 things. They add PTSD and substance use disorder, opioid use disorder, to the list of qualifying conditions. I wanted to do this because I believe stigma is a huge barrier for a lot of people. And if you may go to the CCC website or another website to look at the list of conditions that you could qualify for, those are missing. And I think a lot of times, not seeing that, people instantly shut down and not want to, further investigate. So really wanted to bring that out and put it in the open and have it be known. Also, sadly, as far as PTSD goes, Massachusetts is the only New England state that doesn't have that listed. And I believe out of all the medical states, there's only 2 others that don't have it listed as a qualifying condition. And as recently as last month, Texas, which they had it specifically PTSD, but just for veterans. And they just recently changed that through legislation to be for anybody with PTSD. Mm-hmm. So those are 2 really big problems facing the nation and the veteran community. It's a lot more concentrated because of the issues and injuries veterans have. And the last part of that bill is creating a new pathway for veterans to become registered patients by allowing them to submit their VA paperwork, which, the VA Health Administration is the government's largest health system. So having documentation from there, should satisfy the needs for proving a qualifying condition.
Wow, there's so much going on here. I had absolutely no idea that these needed to even be rectified at the local level. Yep. I had no idea that PTSD wasn't on the list of medical conditions here in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. That's insane. The state purports to do so much for its veterans, and that's one of the top conditions that veterans come up against. I'm so surprised that it's taken this long for somebody to try and put that on some legislation.
So for clarity, though, it's not, you can have PTSD and qualify, but it's not on the list of qualifying conditions. There's an other box that things fall into, but I really feel like calling that out and having it listed will really address stigma and really make it clear to those people who's like, yes, you qualify having that.
Yeah, you're right. It's such a stigmatized thing. I think that's why a lot of veterans that I know, at least, don't either seek mental health help through the VA or seek cannabis, because they're worried about the stigma of both. Mm-hmm. There's like a double stigma attached here. Not only are you going for cannabis, but you're doing it for mental health reasons.
Right.
What do you say to other veterans who are like really feeling stigmatized about that, but they really want to try weed?
I tell them, we're fortunate here in Massachusetts. We have both medical and adult use. If you're unsure about, really how it's going to work for you, or whether you want to have access to medical, you can get in. You can get your feet wet in the adult use industry and sample some things. And again, it's another path. You're getting tested safe cannabis from a dispensary on a consistent basis. You may feel safe there. And it's a great path, and so is growing your own or getting it from someone else that that grows it. Also a great idea, but you have the more peace of mind in knowing that it was tested and what's in that product, and being able to dose it a certain way. Mm-hmm. And for a lot of people, you might have to try different methods. Not everyone can consume the same, with some people not wanting to combustible. They might not want to smoke a joint. They might rather vaporize dried flower, or they may need concentrates. Like for myself, getting off a lot of those hard opioids, I wouldn't have been able to get through the withdrawals without concentrates, without dabs. And then for sleeping, edible seems to be the favorite way to consume for sleeping. Getting enough milligrams in, and having it be in your stomach for the night really helps a lot of people.
I went to a veterans event not too long ago. It was a couple weeks back. It was held in Milford at the Italian American Veterans Center. And this place was full of vets who kind of had their own tables set up where they were selling their wares, like infused tea that they had found that worked for them, or, skin rubs or things that they had created at home. Mm-hmm. So you mentioned growing at home. That's how a lot of these veterans seem to have gotten started, on finding what worked for them, finding what they're comfortable with. And a lot of them, since you can here in Massachusetts, chose to just follow that route. So I think it's really important that veterans also know that you don't just have to go to the stores and,
right.
I know that they offer a lot of veterans discounts, and I love that, especially as a wife of a veteran who's a medical marijuana user. That really saves us a lot of money. But my husband actually found a lot of joy in cultivating his own marijuana plants, and he found that was sort of its own therapy in a way that you could get from marijuana. It wasn't consumption. It was just sort of taking care of the plants.
Right.
So that's a really good point. There are states where you cannot do that. Can you grow in New Hampshire at the moment?
I don't believe you can.
They've been blocking that bill for a while.
Yeah, it's been pretty strict in New Hampshire. But you're absolutely right. Growing it is huge therapeutic value in that. I mean, when you go to the VA, they'll ask you, have you tried gardening and things like that, and and it's like, actually, grow my own medicine, and
pardon my weed.
Exactly. They'd prefer, they won't talk to you about that. They'd prefer you growing tomatoes or something like that. But if you could grow your own toothpaste, people would be doing that to save money. So I think it's a great option.
When you're thinking about the barriers that veterans are facing at the moment, and stigma being one of them, is there still a lot of stigma, do you find, for veterans that want to talk to their VA medical providers about cannabis consumption? Is there still that sort of tension there? There's moments where stigma comes up. For instance, maybe you're seeing a therapist for mental health, and they're not too familiar with cannabis, so they start questioning, well, do you think some of your problems come from your cannabis use? And that can be very stigmatizing, in that you're sharing these things that work for you,
with your healthcare physician or therapist, and then you're getting it right back. Well, like, maybe that's your problem, is that? And it's like, no, I've actually had a lot more success with cannabis as opposed to SSRI inhibitors or benzodiazepines. So those medications come with, again, greater, I would say, harsher side effects. That do not come with cannabis. So in reality, it's a form of harm reduction, and it's still stigmatized. But many harm reductions are stigmatized that way. Even Suboxone. People will be on Suboxone, and they'll have people say, well, then you're not really in recovery because you're still on an opioid. And it's like, whatever path works for that person is what I support.
Yeah. At what point do you get to be like, I'm now in recovery? Like,
right.
When you've decided to take some sort of step towards help, I think that's your recovery.
Mm-hmm.
I found that when my husband started using medical marijuana here in Massachusetts, he was very concerned to get his medical marijuana card for fear that the VA would take some sort of retributive action against him and be like, you can't have these medications anymore. I don't know if that was just hearsay. Was that ever really an issue, and is that still an issue?
I have heard other veterans having that issue. I myself experienced the retribution. Mine wasn't necessarily for use. I experienced the retribution for being a spokesperson for legalization.
Really?
I had the VA contact me and tell me they were cutting half of my benefits, and I would only be receiving half of what I was receiving for my compensation, and that I could appeal it, blah blah blah. And this was during a phone call. The reason I asked why, and I was told that I was too active. And I was like, okay, so it's all right if I'm on the fentanyl and Percocet and Ambien and laying in bed all day, but if I'm using cannabis and now, people are asking me to share my story and I'm able to use my voice to help others, that's a problem. So I asked for a letter mailed to me, and the letter I received stated that I was losing my benefits because I didn't go to my appointments. Well, I had plenty of paperwork stating that I had been making my appointments, and reached out to Senator Elizabeth Warren, explained the situation to her office. They sent 2 congressional letters of inquiry to the VA, and I received a letter saying that my benefits were being reinstated. Then I knew it was retribution because I never had to appeal it. And you don't ever do anything in the VA without going through an appeals process. So having that overturned was great for me and my family, but I've heard more stories of veterans being told they would lose it. But there is the latest now, I believe it's since 2019, the latest VHA directive is that they no longer can cut your benefits off that way. Because before, whenever you picked up your narcotics, so your opioids or benzodiazepines, and you had to sign for it, you were actually signing a pain agreement, which stated that if you tested positive for any illicit drugs, they would cut you off cold turkey of your medications, that you wouldn't have access to that anymore.
Wow.
So that on top of the financial barrier, there's the loss of other medications. I was fortunate enough to have a doctor that realized that I wasn't going to make it on those drugs anymore and needed to taper off all the things I was on. I wasn't going to be able to just cut it. So she was able to make it so I had no drug tests for a period of time while I was tapering off, because you can't go from the highest dose down to nothing. You have to decrease it over time. So within 5 months, I went through, about as comfortable a withdrawals as you could go through by not having to just be cut off. But I've known other veterans that literally were cut off of Suboxone because of admitting to cannabis use.
How in the world are they trying to say they're helping veterans by cutting off drugs?
I know. Instead, that veteran's mother was going to the illicit market to buy Suboxone.
So what can we do about issues like this in other states? I understand that this is a state-by-state thing and that everybody has to become an activist in their state for their local veteran community. Is there nothing that we can really push at the national level? Is there anything going on?
So there's the MORE Act, which is being reintroduced this legislative session, and there's a piece in that bill that makes it so the VA physicians can fill out the referral paperwork so veterans can get their cards. That's really the most progressive idea that's out there, but there are signs of hope and glimmers of light